a deluxe edition General de Brigade, Wargaming the Age of Napoleon. This has been a long time coming for me. I've been wanting to do some kind of video on this fantastic set of rules that's been around for years. It's basically, I believe, the third edition, known as the deluxe edition of the rules. Fantastic game, my friends. This is my go-to set of rules for this period for a lot of reasons, and I'll try and explain some of that as we go through the video. Look at that fantastic artwork there. Again, this is available at Partisan Press, Caliber Books in the UK. Some of you might recognize the author, David C.R. Brown, one of my favorite authors and designers of wargaming miniatures rules, is the author of this one as well, General d'Armée, which I've made several videos on. It's available from the Two Fat Lardies, and basically these are two different games. Some would say this is a new edition of this, but I would say it's not. I mean, they are two distinct games, whereas General de Brigade allows you to play a very tactical level game from division on down. This set of rules basically lets you play with bigger divisions. In other words, more brigades. So bigger battles, effectively. But we're not going to talk about General d'Armée today. We're going to look at General de Brigade. If you like old school wargaming, you're going to love General de Brigade. There's a lot of old school feel to this set of rules. It is a hardback, and we're looking at about, how many pages? Outside of the adverts, about 181 pages of rules and tables and orders, markers that you can cut out, photocopy, and so on and use in your games. Yeah, some orders of battle scenarios, but let's start from the beginning. In fact, let's get a little zoomed in just a little bit. Hopefully we won't get too much glare as we do this little flip through. Like I said before, I am a big fan of David Brown's rules. Like Panzer Grenadier is a great set of rules. British Grenadier, which is for the American War of Independence, which I believe is based on this set of rules. I don't think he actually authored that. Well, he authored this system, so I guess he would be considered the author in that respect. We get a nice introduction here, what it's all about. Welcome to the deluxe edition. I love these photographs. And a lot of these photographs are taken from members of the community. So they're not entirely just, David Brown's collection. And when I say community, I'm talking about the forum over on, I can't remember where it is located. I'll put the link in the description if you'd like to check out the forum. But David Brown is there, and a lot of dedicated fans of these rules are also there, as well as other sets of rules he has written for. Anyway, there's your index. We'll skip past this and we'll get right into the actual chapters. Chapter 1 is scales, base sizes, and dice. This is a 1 figure equals 20 man scale game. 1 model gun is 2 artillery pieces, and ground scale is approximately 1 yard per millimeter. It's designed primarily for 15 mil, but you can play this with 25 mil as well. I think the author's collection is 15 mils. Works great for 15 mil. In my case, I've used 10 millimeter figures using 15 millimeter base sizes and distances, so it works fine for that. And he does discuss how the game works depending on the figure scale you're using, like 15 millimeter figures here and 28 or 25 millimeter scale figures over here. So he does have you covered whichever scale you prefer. Talks about unit frontages and so on and so forth. Now, one thing about this, and again, this is old school, if you like battalions, again, figure scale of 1 to 20 men, where each base is a representative of a company of men, so that you might have, for instance, a battalion of 6 bases, which is 6 companies, one of which is your light company, and another is your grenadier company, and the rest being line infantry companies. If you like representing that on the tabletop, that's what these rules cater to. And that's one of the reasons I like it. It's another reason why it has an old school feel for me. I like representing my battalions and my individual companies. It's just good fun. And it's fun to paint individuals, companies within a battalion. I enjoy that. And so on and so forth. How to use your bases and what they represent. He goes into a lot of detail about that, so you know what is on the table, what a base represents. Equipment, things you'll need, like dice. You need at least 2d6 per player, ideally. Then go to Chapter 2, Troop Types and Formations. This is all about how you form columns, attack columns, and so on and so forth. It also shows you the categories of infantry based on their morale and their training. Obviously, there's infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And it's got grading of those troops. For instance, guard units, then elite, then veteran, then line, then secondary line, and finally, conscripts. Those are the grades of infantry and cavalry in your battles, how you organize your troops. There's also special categories, second class fire. Basically, special rules associated with one of these grades. So maybe some special rules would apply to them. It allows you to really accurately as possible represent individual units that might have stood out in a particular battle. So on and so forth. I'm not going to go into too much detail with the rules, but I just want to show you how it works and how the game is set up. And let's move on. Superior and inferior mounts. The mount quality is important. Enthusiastic units, levy units, and so on and so forth. Then it goes into formations, where you got your column of divisions, closed columns representing the Austrian massed column. You've got line formation. You have open order. You have square. So all those formations are catered to, as you can see. Cavalry formations, for instance, how their lines look. Goes into detail about that, as well as representing cavalry columns. Cavalry and massed columns, reinforcing and melee, Cossacks, always special. And I like how the rules cater to formations like this, you know, instead of just having a general category to throw everybody in, like, for instance, the way Black Powder often does. This rules set actually goes into detail about various troop types when they really stand out and you really want to represent them accurately. Artillery, of course, there's limbered and massed and deployed, otherwise unlimbered. Organization, basic organization is talked about here, how they would be organized. Number of infantry, what does it say? Number of figures in infantry battalion or cavalry regiment. This is for France. And then it goes to the number of companies or squadrons in a unit, based on the time period and so on and so forth. And finally, number of figures in a company or squadron. So this really gives you something to go on when you're modeling your units on the tabletop, so you can get really into the details with this. And there's a lot of special notes here for the French. Then it goes into Austria, Britain, Russia, Prussia. And there you go. That's your basic organization of units right there. Role of officers and divisional organization. This is an important part of the game. Various commander-in-chiefs and the special rules associated with them. Calculating the number of brigade generals. And some example. Girard's division in 1813. That's interesting. Or 1813 is one of the periods I'm working with currently. Goes into brigade structure. An example of a French division, an Austrian division, British Peninsular War division. Examples. There's plenty of examples in this set of rules for you to go by. Notes on brigade formation. So the one thing I will say, these first 3 chapters here, if you really like to tinker with your orders of battle and your scenarios, building scenarios, this really gives you a lot of choices and things that you can do to best represent them in a given battle or in that particular scenario. And I like that. Again, that feels very old school to me. So you'll get a kick out of that. Next chapter is game setup and game turns. One thing I should say, this system does have a point system. I believe it's available in one of the scenario supplements, but normally we don't use points in this, although it would be helpful in some one-off games and to set up a scenario. Normally you don't do that. You don't need that. Usually players like to set up their own scenarios, or historical or quite possibly fictional scenarios, and go from there. But like I said, it does have a point system if that's what you're interested in. Tells you how to set up your game, initial deployment of brigades, optional fog of war deployment cards, which I've never actually used these. I do play solo, so I haven't had much use of them. But we'll see. It does actually represent fog of war with cards where units move about and can be revealed. I believe General Darmé has a similar system. Spotting and revealing fog of war cards, movement of the fog of war cards, then it goes into the game turn, how it's structured, and so on and so forth. It starts with your initiative phase. Yes, this game does use initiative. And here we go into the section outlining the actual game turn. I suppose we should look at this a little bit. And starts off with the initiative phase, establishing phaser and not establishing the phasing and non-phasing players. Goes into compulsory movement phase. This is simultaneous for both sides. Next, it goes into the command phase. Charge declarations and charges. I will say one thing about General de Brigade. Again, much like General Darmé, there is a lot of detail regarding charges and melee combats, or shock combat. It's a hallmark of Napoleonic battles, and the closing in of units is important during this era, and the author really goes into detail with that. It's not overwhelming detail, but it really adds to the feel and the flavor of the period, and I think it's important to have that, and it's one of the reasons I'm so fond of these rules. The simple fact that it goes into the detail with close combat. So yeah, there is that. There is a separate section for charge declarations and charges. Then it goes into normal movement, which follows the charge declarations and charging. Next, we go into shooting, which is firing. Then we go into melee and pursuit tests. This is simultaneous. Then we go into morale, which again is simultaneous. And that's your turn sequence, folks. Let me back out a little bit. And we're going to move on from this. Chapter 5 is compulsory phase. Compulsory movement is carried out prior to charges and normal movement after all no orders have been given. But the troops are still subject to charges, firing, etc. in the later phases. You got pushback, retreating, and routed units, cavalry pursuits, compulsory movement distances. You can see some of the distance there. There is a random factor here. For instance, we have 18 inches plus a d6. So there is a little randomness to the distance units travel, which I think is a good thing. I don't like things being too programmed, especially when you're representing a divisional commander as a player, or a corps commander as well. Talks about broken brigades, melee winners, post-melee compulsory, and so on. One thing about this set of rules, the chapters aren't overwhelmingly long. They're actually quite enjoyable to read. As you can see here, this is basically just one page. Chapter 5, compulsory phase, and that's it. Chapter 6 is command and control, very enjoyable aspect of the game for me as well. Realistic in my opinion, and it's fun. Brigade General's role goes into that, describes how the command and control system works, what it represents, and so on. They have command radiuses, and it lists those down here. Your brigadiers and your divisional commanders have command radiuses. Attaching generals to units, of course, that's a common feature in most war games. Generals leading the attack from the front rank, so you can represent that, because it did happen during the wars. Brigade orders, there's the various orders each brigade can be under, which basically orders in this game put limits on what units within a brigade can and cannot do. That's the whole point of the orders system in here for brigades. Like under assault, units will be able to do only so many things. For instance, I believe it's described here, brigade generals may change to hold orders if seriously repulsed. Where does it describe this? It's designed to bring the brigade into melee with the enemy and dislodge him from his positions. The objective must be a recognizable terrain feature, so you got to say assault the big hill, or assault the village. You got to write that out. Or a specific identifiable enemy brigade. let's take on the Light Brigade. Portuguese brigades on the British right flank, for instance. Vague or very general orders, such as assault the enemy to the front, are not acceptable. The orders must be either written down or stated. All right, so here's the assault orders. Here's the requirements. You can only give the order to a brigade if you meet these requirements. Like, for instance, at least 50% of formed close order units within the brigade must charge or advance at least a half move towards the enemy where possible. So they have to do that. Charge restrictions, there is none. Well, let's take a look at the other orders so you can kind of get a context for how these orders work. His support order. Here's all the restrictions, what you can't do, and the requirements, the things you have to do. For instance, under support, at least 50% of formed close order units must advance or move at least half a move towards the designated support position, where possible. Again, you identify in your orders what you are supporting, like support the 1st Brigade, for instance. There's also an engage order. There is a move order. That's pretty self-explanatory. There is hold, which I believe is the default you fall to after you complete one order. There's retire. You want your troops to fall back in an organized fashion. Then it talks about what the initial brigade orders are for your units. Changing brigade orders and CNCs changing brigade orders. CNCs being your divisional commanders normally, although they can be corps commanders as well. Change brigade orders procedure. How you do it. Basically, it's a die roll. Modified 2d6 score. You need a target number you have to meet, and there is some modifiers to that roll. You succeed, orders apply that turn. Otherwise you fail, nope, you got to wait it out and make another test. Command and confusion is always a possibility. Troops can end up panicking or lose their nerve, that kind of stuff. So there's risk to changing orders on the fly like this. Brigade General Initiative. And here it goes in those, losing your nerve and things like that, creating new brigades in a battle during the fight, assuming command of leaderless brigades. Lots of detail in here. So the command section, the command chapter is actually quite extensive, covers all kinds of fun things for your battles. I think you guys get the sense that this is a very tactical game. I mean, as a divisional set of rules, you're getting a lot of rich, flavorful detail for your battalions and your brigades, regiments, and also your division. So you're getting a lot of fun details in your games. Another reason why I like it so much. And here's where we're getting into some really good stuff, the charges. It defines them. The rules are pretty tight in this section. You're getting a lot of detail, and it really covers charges extensively. Again, here's your command radiuses. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but this is a detailed part of the game. It is the most enjoyable part of the game. We talk about charge requirements, charge restrictions, infantry charge restrictions, cavalry charge restrictions, skirmisher charge restrictions. Skirmishers may only charge other skirmishers. That's basically the only restriction. Talks about skirmish screens and charges. Skirmishers are handled pretty cool in this game. Instead of having individual units of skirmishers on the table moving around doing their own thing, or detached companies of skirmishers always in front of the battalion it's its parent, what happens is that each brigade of infantry produces so many bases, so many stands of skirmish infantry. It's based on how many battalions or regiments are in the brigade. And that produces a brigade skirmish screen. And basically all those skirmish bases stick together and they protect the brigade as a whole, really. I like that. I like it a lot. Support fire. Pretty straightforward. Pretty much when you got multiple targets in front of you, when you fire, you kind of got to spread your fire out. You can't focus on a particular unit. Something else I find to be very realistic. Opportunity charges, evade procedure. Has a nice little detailed procedure for that. And notes on charges. And that's it. That is charges. Then it goes into the movement. Another thing you might notice is the rules are organized along the turn sequence. Movement phase actually follows the charge declarations and charge movement phase. So you'll see that the next chapter is movement. We just did the charges. And here's where it talks all about how units move on the table. Normal movement, movement restrictions, and so on and so forth. And remember, orders, brigade orders play a big role in how you move your units on the table, if you remember. It also covers tactical marches, moving longer distances, that kind of thing. Tactical march distances. So you can do that in your battles. Formation change table. Here's how long it takes to change your formations of your battalions. Your regimental square, battalion square, line, column, skirmish, unformed, and faltering units. Requires their full movement turn to form up into an original formation. Okay. Formation test table. This can be critical moments in the battle. Double one in formation test, unformed definition. So you're getting a lot of detail and definitions and examples in here, of course. Talks about oblique movement, about faces, stepping back, interpenetration. Then it goes to special notes about conscripts, and optional rule, actually, on handling them. Again, this is another reason I like it. There's a lot of historical options that you can add to your scenarios or your game sessions based on your own research, really. Which again is an old school concept. Imagine that. Modify your game based on your own research. That's an old school concept, and I like that. Then it goes into terrain. This talks about all the different types of terrain, how they affect battles. You got your good terrain, you got your difficult terrain, you've got what's considered as steep slopes to some of your hills. Severe terrain. For instance, this includes features such as dense woods, marshes, passable but deep and or steep-sided streams, or exceptionally steep and rugged high ground. Like peninsular battles, for instance. This is a nice picture. Visibility through terrain, roads, farm villages, and towns, how to represent them and their effect on the battle. Troop capacity in built-up areas. There's a limit how many stands can get inside of a village or a series of buildings. So that's an important feature. How to occupy them, and cover definitions, the various types of cover that you can have and what they grant you. Terrain effects. Next chapter is 10. It is all about firing. This is where you get to do all kinds of cool shooting at the enemy. Fire and movement, firing restrictions, measuring the range, so on and so forth. I'll read this for you. The phasing player fires first, followed by the non-phasing player. Casualties caused by the phasing players. Firing, do not fire back. See that? As a general game concept, the phasing player is getting in the first volleys. Players conduct all firing within their own fire phase in the following order. First is artillery, next is skirmishers, and finally, close order infantry. It is not essential players follow the shooting sequence, and some players may simply find it easier to resolve all firing by working from left to right. I guess if you're playing really big battles, that would be useful. And it talks about fire and movement. Firing restrictions, priority targets, who you have to shoot at, who you can't shoot at. And when you have multiple units in front of you, how do you do that? It kind of tells you how to split the fire up. So you can't just focus on one unit when you got about 3 units in front of you deployed, like enemy advancing columns, that kind of thing. Split fire, multiple attacks on one target, line of sight, always an important part of any miniatures wargame. Firing through gaps. Close order infantry firing rules. Mixed column targets. There's examples of like what I was talking. Firing on mass targets. Firing out of built-up areas. Infantry firing through enemy skirmish screens. And you got British infantry. Second line infantry. Those good shooters. Russian infantry. And so on and so forth. Infantry ranges, give you some idea here. Muskets are 0 to 6 inches, and you'll also notice there is centimeters listed here, as well as imperial, or inches. So whichever method you use for your battles, you're good. They got you covered. Long range for muskets is 7 to 12 inches. Rifles, 8 to 14 inches is long range. Less than that would be effective range. Where most of your combat would take place, so you're shooting, effective range. And close order infantry modifiers for your shooting. There's all the modifiers, and these won't all apply at once. You might get 1 or 2 that might actually apply at any one time. Special notes to define some of these modifiers for you. Musketry, casualty, table. How many figures do I remove? That kind of thing. Open order. Artillery firing. Friendly units are too close to the enemy. Be careful with your battery. So it takes into account all kinds of interesting, unique situations. Unique to the Napoleonic Wars, which again is nice. Another reason why I enjoy this. Firing overhead. Firing through the enemy skirmish screens. Again, like I mentioned, another great thing about these rules, another old school concept, is that you can feel free to change these rules any way you want. In fact, it's promoted in this set of rules. I know we live in a very commercial age where a company puts out a set of rules and all the players are expected to follow those rules, particularly with tournament play or club games among strangers, which is nice, which is good. But if you play a lot of games outside of tournaments and outside of clubs, if you do a lot of solo gaming or at your home with some friends, this is the kind of rules these are. They're geared for you. They're geared towards a player who not only enjoys the history, but likes tinkering with the rules to best represent certain things that to him are more realistic or more historical, I should say. That's what these rules allow you to do. And again, that to me is an old school concept, and I enjoy that. And I also enjoy that with other rules by David Brown, for instance, Panzer Grenadier. And of course, General d'Armée, which I showed off earlier. Oh, rockets. You got to mention the rockets. Can't forget them. How to remove your casualties and represent them before you actually remove a base. You keep track of model losses. I guess if you mounted figures individually, you could actually take off individuals. Or if you have figures mounted on multiple base sizes, like you got a base of 2 figures and a base of 3 figures and a base of 1 figure in a unit, you can just take off the appropriate number of figures whenever losses occur. But normally, you keep track of figure casualties by putting a little marker or a dice or something before you actually remove them. Notes on infantry and artillery firing. Always important stuff. These are basically author's notes when you see it in italics like this, and very useful and appreciated. Next, we got Chapter 11, which is all about skirmishers. It defines them. It talks about brigade skirmish screens, which I mentioned earlier, and there's some representations of them. As you can see, this brigade skirmish screen all stretched out, protecting its brigade. And here's another example. And yeah, there you go. By the way, basing in this system is typically your close order are in 2 ranks of figures, which is normal today. Skirmish units are typically based in 1 rank, but they can be based also in 2 ranks as well, like close order, because they have the option of forming up in close order as well, if need be. They can do that. And there's multiple ways to represent that. You can just put these bases together in a certain way, or you can have alternate figures to replace these when they are in close order, so they look more like this. Again, very cool, and I enjoy that. Reinforcing the brigade skirmish screen, that's where you send up troops from your line infantry and your battalions to fill in losses amongst the casualties in the skirmish screen. So not all of the members of a skirmish screen are going to be trained light infantry. Interesting. Goes into deploying them. General skirmish rules. It's again all about the skirmishers. Next we got close combat and melees. Again, all the detail you would want for resolving shock combat. Outnumbering the enemy, defending and attacking built-up areas. Fun stuff right there. Routing units. The dreaded double 6 during melees. Another fun feature of David Brown's rules is when you roll a double 6, it usually results in something bad or something good. It all depends on the situation and the set of rules. And this General the Brigade is no exception. And there is a separate table for this when you do get that double 6. Sappers. Melee modifiers, melee results table. Once you made your rolls, you look at the results, which tells you here what depending on the difference between scores. and this gives you your results and the winner's reaction and so on. You just carry it out on the table. Really fun stuff. Again, definitions from the table over here to help you understand what's going on and what's represented. Melee casualty table. Bonus move after melee, post-melee, cavalry pursuit test. Your cavalry can just run off, chasing after the enemy, trying to finish them off, being cavalry that they are. And again, plenty of examples. Notes on melee, again from the author in italics. And it goes to chapter 13, which is all about morale, the all-important morale. How long troops stay around. There's brigade morale, there's unit morale. You can have a brigade fall out of the battle because some of its units are beat up. The brigade itself will withdraw, and that's not always a good thing. Surrendering, automatic dispersal point. And here it talks about brigade morale. So it's not just individual units like you see in a lot of games. This looks at the bigger formations involved here. Supported brigade definitions. And I should also point out that most of the die rolls in this game are typically a 2d6, and it's usually after a target number. And there are modifiers that apply to your die roll, and they result in a, usually you look up the result on a table. Brigade morale test. Notes on morale. Chapter 14 is double six and risk to generals. Here's that dreaded double six. All kinds of things can happen in here. Like brigade commanders can be shot. And it's very colorful descriptions here, which is fun. Here's my favorite, number 11. If you get a double six, you roll on this chart here. Pocket watch hit. General upset, but otherwise unharmed. Another result is mortally wounded, carried from the field, and dies with honor. Another result is panics at the sound of gunfire and flees the field. Utterly disgraced, court-martial, and shot in front of army the next day. That's not good for the officer with the double six. Replacing the CNC. Double sixes for morale. And again, depends on where you get the double six from, and it tells you how to handle it. Victory and defeat in your battles. Division and corps tests for defeat. Division and corps falter or break point. So on and so forth. It's only a couple pages. And then finally it goes into optional rules. A lot of good stuff to really inspire you on how you can represent various things historically in your games. How to represent battalion guns, cavalry charges by squadron. Some people are interested in that. Skirmish order cavalry, smoke, redoubt and field fortifications, brigade morale, weather. The Ottoman Turks, special rules for the Ottomans, and there's a lot of them if you're a big fan of the Ottomans. And here's a cool one here. It's the War of 1812. Special rules you can use to represent Native Indians and American units and play out battles of the War of 1812. And finally, it goes into chapter 17, which is how to play bigger games, core level games. Instead of focused on the division, you're adding the corps commander. And without bogging the game down, it tells you how you can simplify the lower levels of command and focus more on the corps. And that's what this section talks all about. So if you are a fan of playing big battles, yet have some tactical feel to your games, this is how you handle it. This is what's done. Appendix A is your appendices, historical orders of battle. French, 4th Division. These are examples that you would find from actual orders of battle that you can use as a basis for creating your own scenarios. We got one for Austrians as well. Prussia, Russia, Saxons, and the French, of course. British and the French again. Typically your units are like, well, 1 to 20 scale. You can figure that out. We're talking 36, 32 figures in a battalion, or bigger, 48, 42 figures in a unit. Big Austrian battalions, that kind of thing. They can get quite sizable, but not always. A typical French unit, depending on the period, would probably be about 24, considering campaign losses. But it could be considerably bigger. And point value and points game setup. There is a point system in here in the rules. I thought that was in one of the scenario books. I must be thinking British Grenadier. Yeah, definitely. All right, so if you like point system, here it is. It's a very simple point system, not incredibly detailed, as it shouldn't be. This isn't a tournament game after all, but it does give you a point value system that allows you to gauge the strength of sides when you're creating your own scenario, or even looking at a historical matchup and you want to kind of balance it a little more. Maybe somebody's new to the game and you're more experienced. This is one way to do that. Give him an advantage in points. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy points in my games. I don't normally use them, but I like the option to use them for scenario creation, balancing reasons, and maybe even for campaigns, depending on how you use it. Standard costings and so on and so forth. These are standard points costs for units within each nation. Nice little simplified way. Just look it up and there it is. Random terrain generator, which is nice. Oh, it talks about flank marches. You can have troops off table, moving to the sound of the guns, which is cool. Next, some scenarios. Gotta have some scenarios in your book. Got Relica. I know my friend Stefan is a big fan of that battle on the peninsula. 1808, here is the scenario. It's got a nice map, typically for a 6x4 or bigger table in 15 mil, but it does talk about adjustments for different scales of figures, whatever you're using, typically. The orders of battle. Romero, 1808, again, peninsular stuff with an order of battle. Deployment rules, terrain. We got Borodino, 1812. The Revsky readout, actually. This is a specific part of that battle. And again, as you'd expect, orders of battle, map, and so on and so forth. Katzbach, 1813. General de Brigade roster sheet. And orders markers, you put these down next to your units and brigades to show their various morale states, or unit status markers if they're informed, part of a broken brigade, morale test if they have to take one. Routed, uncontrolled charge, pushback. Here's your orders markers we looked at earlier. We've got the assault orders, engage orders, move orders, hold, retire, support, and attack. Reserve, these are all orders. You simply put these down next to your brigades to show the brigade is under that orders. If you don't like the order, you can attempt to change that orders with either your brigadier or your divisional commander. Depending on how far away they are, you make the die roll, see if you can change it now. If you fail, well, you're just going to have to wait to change those orders. That's the basics of the order system in this game. Very simple, realistic, it's not complex, and it's fun. How overlooked is the fun factor of your games? Boy. General de Brigade, game turn. There's a little sequence of play. And of course, compulsory adverts, Cavalier and Partisan. And there it is. That is General de Brigade, folks. And as a little extra, I will throw in that the system does actually have some scenario books, which I mentioned, which are designed both from the author as well as from fans. And one of my good friends, Paul Alba, actually has some photographs in one of these. I think it's this one, or is it this one? Well, one of them. You can see some of his figures. They might even be on the cover. We won't look for them now, but he does have some figures in here. And I will show briefly. Usually each book caters to a specific period or a specific location. Like, for instance, this one here is Napoleonic Scenarios number 6, Imperial Sunset. It's all about the later battles of the Empire. And here's the index to the battles. As you can see right here, these are all the battles or the scenarios that are in here. Denovitz, I believe. This one right here, Denovitz, this is my project that I'm working on. Part of this scenario anyway. I believe this is the one. I'm basically not doing the entire scenario because they are quite big, but part of it. I'll show you the layout. Really nice maps in here. If you love the Napoleonic Wars, if you love the history, if you like old school gaming with big units and casualty losses representing them on the table, and a good fun game that has a lot of feel for a tactical Napoleonic experience, I highly recommend General de Brigade. Even with having played General d'Armée, I still prefer General de Brigade. and it has a lot to do with the fun and the flavor this game gives me. I mean, we can have regiments capturing standards from an enemy, which is cool, and that's an important part of Napoleonic battles. When we read the descriptions, you're always seeing paintings, for instance, of captured banners taken from the Battle of so-and-so. You know, it's a big part of the game. It have an effect on the morale of your opponent. It caters to those kind of things. And again, that's fun. So, yeah. These scenario books are highly worth it. Each scenario is about maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 pages in length. You get a map, orders of battle, some colorful pictures, and of course, notes on deployment, objectives, special rules for terrain, and so on and so forth. And I believe this is the latest. I could be wrong. Last I looked, anyway. It is number 7, Shadows Over the Empire. More late period Napoleonic battles. And again, these are taken from the community, as well as the author. I believe this was a community-created version. The author didn't actually design any of these scenarios. Some fellows over in Italy, I believe. Milan. There you go, Milan. Yeah, so there you go, folks. That's a look at General de Brigade. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, it's been a long time in coming. I needed to make one of these on this game that I love so much. Any questions? Ask away. Like, share, subscribe, all that goodness. Let me know what you think about General de Brigade and Napoleonic Wargaming. And if you're new to it, would I recommend this? I actually would. I would recommend this. This is not an overly complex game. Not at all. But it has details in it where it should be, like in charges and close combat or shock. There's a lot of detail in there, but it's not the kind of detail that it's a bunch of different mechanics that apply. It's all universal mechanics, easy to remember and easy to resolve those mechanics. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys soon. Let me know, give me some feedback on this game, General de Brigade, any questions and so on. And hang in there, folks. It's only going to get better. Take care.